He was my dearest friend and my best friend, not as man and woman, but as two human beings. There's so many stories about.
Maureen O'Hara sat beside a hospital bed at UCLA Medical Center in June 1979, watching the strongest man she ever knew fade into whispers. For nearly 40 years, she and John Wayne had shared 5 films, one enduring bond, and a friendship that outlasted 3 marriages, 2 wars, and every rumor Hollywood ever printed about them. But what did she actually say when the cameras stopped rolling and the legend everyone thought they understood was gone? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what Maureen O'Hara admitted about John Wayne in her own words. The friendship Hollywood could never fully explain. Some partnerships in film history feel manufactured, built by studio executives chasing chemistry that never quite existed off camera. Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne were not that. From the moment they were paired together, audiences sensed something real happening between them. And decades later, it turns out audiences were right. Can you imagine spending nearly 40 years standing beside someone through broken marriages, career collapses, and personal tragedy, all while the entire world insisted on calling you just friends? That was the reality O'Hara and Wayne lived inside for most of their adult lives. They met through director John Ford, the man who would go on to cast them together 5 times. And the connection between them was immediate enough that Ford himself later admitted he had stumbled onto something special. Their most famous collaboration, The Quiet Man, released in 1952, became far more than a box office success. It earned Ford the Academy Award for Best Director and remains one of the most beloved American films ever shot in Ireland. O'Hara played the fiery Mary-Kate Danaher, opposite Wayne's retired boxer Sean Thornton, and the film has since landed among the greatest cinematic love stories ever ranked by the American Film Institute. Watching it, you would assume the 2 stars were genuinely falling for each other on screen. And in a strange way, millions of fans have spent decades wondering if that assumption was closer to the truth than either star ever confirmed. What made their bond different from a typical co-star relationship was its longevity. O'Hara devoted extensive space in her own memoir to detailing the making of that film and her history with Wayne, describing their connection as one of the defining relationships of her professional life. She was blunt about most things in that book: her clashes with directors, her frustration with being typecast, her disappointment at never receiving an Oscar nomination despite a career spanning more than 60 films. But when the subject turned to Wayne, her tone softened into something closer to devotion than professional respect. Their 5 films together, spanning westerns, war dramas, and romantic comedies, gave audiences a consistent through line across nearly 2 decades of American cinema. Rio Grande, The Wings of Eagles, McLintock, Big Jake, and of course The Quiet Man, all leaned on a dynamic that felt lived in rather than rehearsed. Co-stars and crew members who worked alongside them often remarked that the tension and warmth audiences saw on screen mirrored something genuine happening just out of frame, a rare consistency that few Hollywood duos ever managed to sustain across so many years and so many different genres. It also helped that both stars came from worlds shaped by hardship before fame ever found them. O'Hara had clawed her way out of Dublin as a teenager, fighting through an industry that treated actresses as disposable. Wayne had built his entire public identity around toughness and self-reliance, a persona forged well before stardom ever touched him. 2 people who understood struggle on that level rarely form shallow friendships, and theirs was anything but shallow. There was also a shared sense of humor that outsiders rarely got to witness. On set, the pair reportedly traded insults, pulled jokes, and teased each other constantly between takes, a dynamic that crew members often said made long shooting days in remote locations feel far less grueling. Their friendship had a rhythm of its own, built on the kind of familiarity that allowed them to joke without worrying about offending each other. That playful energy fed directly into their performances, giving audiences a spark that felt spontaneous because, in many ways, it genuinely was. Their chemistry was not simply manufactured for the camera. It came from years of trust, mutual respect, and knowing exactly how far they could push one another. So before we get into what kind of friend John Wayne became to Maureen O'Hara off-set, and what she was willing to say about him decades later, you need to understand just how far that loyalty actually extended. We are about to break down the moments that proved this was not a typical Hollywood friendship. And honestly, what she did for him in Washington might surprise you more than anything from their movies. Keep watching, because it only gets more personal from here. What Maureen O'Hara was really willing to do for John Wayne: strip away the movie posters and the box office numbers, and what remains is a portrait of loyalty that few Hollywood friendships ever match. Maureen O'Hara did not simply co-star with John Wayne. She stood up for him, publicly and emotionally, at moments when it actually mattered. In 1979, as Wayne's health was failing, Congress moved to award him the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors the United States can bestow. O'Hara testified before lawmakers on his behalf, and she told the committee she had known John Wayne for 39 years and had called him her dearest friend and her best friend throughout that time, adding that to people around the world. Wayne represented not just a fine actor, but the United States of America itself. It was O'Hara who suggested the medal carry a simple inscription, one that Wayne's own family later said meant everything to him: reading only John Wayne, an American. That kind of public devotion rarely comes from a purely professional bond. Wayne's own family seemed to understand that better than anyone. His daughter Melinda Munoz later described O'Hara as someone who felt like a sister to her father and like an aunt to the rest of the family. Someone who showed up for weddings, holidays, and every ordinary family occasion rather than just red carpet events. His son Michael went even further, once saying that O'Hara was the only woman who could match his father kiss for kiss, punch for punch, and stride for stride. A description that says as much about her spirit as it does about their chemistry. Away from cameras, their friendship carried the texture of real family life. O'Hara later recalled Wayne visiting her in St. Croix, driving a borrowed red truck far too large for him because, in her words, he refused to fit into anything smaller, slowly cruising the streets while other drivers honked in frustration behind him. It is a small memory, almost comedic, yet it reveals exactly the kind of everyday closeness that defined their relationship long after the cameras stopped rolling. Rumors about a deeper romance between them followed the pair for decades, fueled by their on-screen chemistry and their obvious real-life affection. A biography of Wayne, written years after his death, claimed that a close friend told the author the two had shared a long romantic relationship that continued even during Wayne's marriage to his third wife, allegedly meeting privately at his Arizona ranch. Robert Mitchum's son, Christopher, who worked alongside both stars, went on record saying he believed Wayne was truly in love with O'Hara, though he also suggested Wayne tended to marry women he thought he could control. And O'Hara was never that kind of woman. O'Hara herself consistently denied any romantic affair throughout her lifetime, insisting what existed between them was a profound friendship rather than a secret relationship. And no verified documentation has ever proven otherwise. What nobody disputes, regardless of which side of that rumor they land on, is how deeply Wayne trusted her. Fellow actor Harry Carey Jr., who worked with both of them, pushed back against affair claims directly, pointing out that whatever existed off-screen between Wayne and O'Hara never resembled the kind of obvious attraction Wayne showed towards some of his other co-stars. To Carey and many others who spent years on set with them, what O'Hara and Wayne had looked less like a hidden romance and more like something rarer in Hollywood, an unshakable, decades-long partnership built on mutual respect. Now, here is where the story turns from admiration to heartbreak, because everything that friendship had built together was about to be tested in the hardest way possible. What happened inside a UCLA hospital room in the summer of 1979 is the part fans still talk about, so do not go anywhere. Inside the final days at UCLA Medical Center by early 1979, the man audiences had watched dominate movie screens for 5 decades was fighting a battle no amount of grit could win. Wayne had survived lung cancer back in 1964, losing a lung to the disease and returning to work within months, a recovery that only cemented his reputation for toughness. But the cancer that reappeared 15 years later attacked his stomach, and this time it refused to stay contained. John Wayne was born Marion Robert Morrison on May 26, 1907, in Winterset, Iowa, and he was already 71 years old and visibly thinner than fans remembered by the time doctors diagnosed the new cancer in January of 1979. He still appeared at the Academy Awards that April to present the Best Picture prize, and the sight startled millions watching at home, since the frail figure on stage looked so different from the towering screen presence audiences had grown up idolizing. He later joked privately that the makeup crew had piled on so much foundation that he complained about not wanting to look embalmed before his time. 9 days after that Oscars appearance, he was admitted to UCLA Medical Center for what would become his final hospitalization. Aubrey Malone's 2013 biography of O'Hara recounts how the actress made the trip to be by his side during his final hospitalization, staying for 3 consecutive days at his bedside and putting on what witnesses described as a cheerful Irish act, despite how seriously worried she actually was underneath it. At one particularly heavy moment, Wayne turned to her and asked why the two of them had drawn such rotten luck in life, a reference to their string of failed marriages, lost loved ones, and now his own failing body. O'Hara, refusing to let the conversation sink into despair, reportedly shot back that mileage never hurt a Rolls-Royce and joked that the two of them were simply a matching pair of classic cars still running strong. When it finally came time for her to leave his room for what both of them likely understood might be the last time, O'Hara stood, put on her coat, and turned to say goodbye. The final words she heard from Wayne, preserved in accounts documented afterward, were startlingly ordinary. A simple compliment about how nice her coat looked on her. There was no dramatic farewell speech, no confession, just an old friend noticing something small and human in the middle of unbearable circumstances, which somehow made the moment even harder to forget. Wayne slipped into a coma the following Sunday and never regained consciousness. He died on June 11, 1979, inside UCLA Medical Center at the age of 72, surrounded by family, and news of his passing spread almost instantly across a country that had spent decades watching him embody a very particular idea of American strength. His family later helped establish the John Wayne Cancer Institute, turning his final battle into a resource meant to help future patients fight the same disease that took him. For O'Hara, the loss cut in a way that few others outside his immediate family could understand. She had already lost her husband, aviation pioneer Charles Blair, in a plane crash the year before. And now she was losing the man she had spent nearly 4 decades calling her dearest friend. Whatever the true nature of their relationship had been behind closed doors, there was nothing performative about the grief she carried afterward. Grief she would spend the rest of her life quietly processing in interviews, tributes, and eventually her own writing. So after everything they shared, the movies, the testimony in Washington, that final hospital visit, you might be wondering what Maureen O'Hara actually said once she was finally ready to talk about him honestly. That answer is coming up next, and it might not be what you expect. What Maureen O'Hara finally admitted about loving John Wayne. For the rest of her long life, Maureen O'Hara walked a careful line whenever John Wayne's name came up in interviews. She never confirmed a romance. She never fully denied the emotional depth people suspected either. Instead, she gave the world something rarer, an honest, unwavering account of what he meant to her as a person, delivered with the kind of certainty that left little room for doubt about how much she truly loved him, in whatever form that love actually took. In a 2004 interview conducted around the release of her memoir, journalist Patricia Harty asked O'Hara to try summing up who John Wayne really was. O'Hara's answer stretched well beyond a single sentence. She called him a decent, fine, wonderful man who adored his kids and stayed fiercely loyal to his friends, someone who would put himself in danger before ever letting a friend down, before admitting there simply were not enough words in the English language to properly describe someone like him. That devotion never faded, even as O'Hara herself grew older and more private. In one of her final major interviews, granted when she was already in her 90s, she agreed to only 2 conditions before speaking: no questions about her first 2 marriages, and nothing too personal about John Wayne, since she had spent decades refusing to publicly address the rumors of a love affair between them. Yet the journalist who conducted that interview later described how the briefest mention of his name changed something in her expression instantly. Her eyes lighting up every time Wayne's name came up, telling a story worth 1,000 words despite everything she chose to leave unsaid. When pressed gently, all she offered was that he had been a wonderful person, and that the 2 of them had been proud of the work they built together. It was only after her death on October 24, 2015, at age 95, that the deeper layers of that friendship began surfacing publicly. Family members close to both stars started speaking more openly about what they had witnessed for decades. That same retrospective later revealed that one of Wayne's own sons had confirmed his father was genuinely in love with O'Hara, a confirmation that arrived only once both legends were gone and unable to weigh in themselves. That revelation reframed years of denials, hinting that whatever existed between them may have run deeper than either star was ever willing to admit, while the cameras were still rolling. O'Hara's grandson, Connor Fitzsimons, who helped care for her in her final years in Boise, Idaho, later spoke about how significant Wayne remained in his own upbringing, describing him as the model of manhood his grandmother pushed him toward emulating, a man who opened doors, treated people with respect, and loved his country deeply. That a woman raising her grandson decades after Wayne's death still leaned on his memory as a moral compass says something profound about how permanently he remained woven into her sense of family, long after their films together had faded from theaters. At her funeral in 2015, that same permanence was on full display. Wayne's daughter, Melinda Munoz, attended the service and once again described O'Hara using family language rather than professional titles, reaffirming that the bond between the 2 families had never really been about Hollywood at all. Mourners who filled the church that day walked past portraits from O'Hara's most celebrated film roles, many of them the very movies she made alongside Wayne, a fitting tribute to a partnership that had quite literally defined both of their careers. So what did Maureen O'Hara ultimately confess about John Wayne, if anything at all? Perhaps the most honest answer is that she never needed a dramatic confession because she had already spent nearly 40 years showing everyone exactly how she felt through her actions rather than her words. She testified for him before Congress. She sat beside his hospital bed during his final days rather than sending flowers from a distance. She spoke about him with unmistakable warmth well into her 90s, even while carefully protecting the privacy of whatever truly happened between them. And in the end, her own family carried his memory forward long after both of them were gone, proof that some friendships really do outlast everything, including the 2 people who built them. Their story endures not because of unresolved rumors or tabloid speculation, but because it represents something Hollywood rarely produces authentically: a bond built on genuine loyalty rather than image management. Decades of interviews, tributes, and family recollections all point back to the same simple truth: whatever they called it, it was real, and it never once wavered. Whatever name history eventually settles on for what Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne shared, friendship, love, or something that never fit neatly into either category, one truth remains impossible to dispute. For nearly 4 decades, 2 of the biggest stars in American film history chose each other again and again, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the box office numbers stopped mattering. With this,
we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.